Welcome to Boilers Extra. I'm Nathan Baird from the Indy Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier.
Sam, you have a nice bright room. We don't get to say that very often. And I'm in a different room altogether, and I don't like the background, so I've used a photo I took of Matt Painter just sitting on the bench before an NCAA tournament game last season. So those of you who are listening on audio can't see it, but if you're wondering why my background is that way, it's because it just is.
Well, we're doing this in the daytime, which helps with the lighting for my
True.
stake.
And it doesn't for me because I'm down in my basement that has no windows.
There you go. Thus, Matt Painter is your backdrop.
So that's Matt Painter. And I don't even know why I took this photo. It was just him sitting on the bench before an NCAA tournament game, just sort of hanging out, just sort of taking in the scene. They must have been just warming up. I really don't even remember, but yeah. Anyway, I'm going to work on that. I'm very new. I'm not technologically advanced, or I'm not technologically limited. I feel like that means there's people who, no matter what you do, they're not going to be able to understand technology and they're going to fail at it. I'm just technologically ignorant about things, and one of them is setting up a virtual background for my computer. So I just did that for the first time today, and we'll see how it goes long term.
Well, yeah, this is a trial period, I guess, for that.
It is. It's like preseason. It's preseason for that, but midseason for Purdue basketball and an important part of the offseason for Purdue football. I wanted to touch base on that first. We have several questions, and a lot of them are basketball related. I just wanted to touch a little bit on Purdue football recruiting. We're recording this on Wednesday morning, and today was technically the start of the late signing period. For those of you who are old enough to remember, this used to be the big day, right? Like this was National Signing Day. Yeah. This is when you laid out your whole class. Purdue used to have, and maybe this was actually more even after it started to gravitate to December. I can remember under Daryl Hazel, like they would, and I guess maybe under Danny Hope, they were bringing in like every assistant coach to talk about their position group and like show film and stuff. Like, I don't know if this was because it was before people had access to all that information, but they really used to sell it. And then here we get to today, and Purdue has one signee on the late signing period because they did all of their work before in the December period and the transfer portal, obviously. But I did want to kind of look ahead to 2027 because the 2026 class I always thought was important. It was going to sort of start helping lay a foundation. This program can't get by on just the transfer portal alone. They had to start acquiring and developing players through conventional high school recruiting to solidify things, and then you augment it with the transfer portal. And that's a process that was going to have to start in 2026. 2027 is where you, I think, though, start to see even more where they have set up relationships, where they have made an impression on important people. And a position I wanted to talk about in that realm was quarterback, where it has been a long time. I wrote this today, actually, a little piece at indystar.com. Do you know when the last time Purdue signed a top 250 quarterback and he made it to the roster and took snaps in a game? Do you remember who the last one to do that would have been?
I don't know where Curtis Painter was ranked. I know Kyle Orton was very high. I would say one of those two. I know Brendan Kirsch also was a pretty high recruit as well. So I would say, I'm going to go with Curtis Painter.
Well, you don't have to go back quite that far, but it's getting there when I ask the next question. But the first question, just who was the last one to take snaps? Brady Allen did take snaps here. So he was the last one that was like and that was, I think, the class of 2022.
Who was that you said? Brady Allen.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. Was the last one to just take snaps. To start a game, you have to go all the way back to, I think it's 2014 class and Danny Etling.
Yes.
The last time they got like a high ranking prospect and at quarterback. And they've had other quarterbacks. I mean, they've obviously developed other quarterbacks since then that came here and started games. And, David Blau and Aiden O'Connell and everybody in between. Like they've brought other quarterbacks in, but the last time they made like a splash on the national level as far as a quarterback, got a guy who had a lot of offers and a lot of, other potential people in the mix, and got him to campus and then developed him into a starter. It's been a while. And I brought that up because, there's some guys on 2027 that they're in on. I mean, the most prominent one is a guy from Lombard Montini. His name's Israel Abrams. He's a top 50 prospect, so not a 5-star, but not far off of it. And I don't know that they're leading for him, but they're certainly in the mix. He's been to campus multiple times. And I was thinking of this in terms of, there's a concept in economics, national economics, called leading economic indicators. And it's like you look at these other numbers that tell you where the economy will be going. And I kind of look at who Purdue can recruit and sign at quarterback as sort of a leading indicator of where the program is going. That, are you getting one of the best quarterbacks who was signed in the Big Ten that year and keeping him here? I think that's the other thing that's a little bit of the X factor, is getting him here. If they don't start right away, are you keeping him here and developing them into that next level? And it's an indicator because you don't get immediate results from it necessarily, but I think it starts to tell you something about what recruits are really thinking about your program, because those players don't tend to commit to a place that's struggling unless there's something there that they really believe in.
Yeah, and I think we're way past the days of Purdue being able to sell quarterbacks on Drew Brees and Kyle Orton and Jim Everett and Bob Greasy, guys like that. Those names are almost foreign to 18-year-olds now. And with the money involved, it's a completely different game altogether anyway. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You have to get a top tier quarterback for Purdue to kind of revert to its brand a little bit, which is throwing the football a lot, moving the ball that way. And I'm not saying that's the way that the only way Purdue can win, but that's kind of, when you look at identities, that's throughout history been Purdue's success, is when you have quarterbacks that are at the top of the Big Ten in passing yards and touchdowns and all that stuff. Even some of the guys you mentioned who, weren't highly recruited, like David Blau or Aiden O'Connell, Elijah Sindel are in that mix as well, when he was swapping quarterback roles with David Blau seemingly every week. And Israel Abrams is an interesting one. Purdue's offered a ton of quarterbacks in the 2027 class. He's I think the highest rated one, and he's still not committed. Some of the others with Purdue offers have already verbally committed to Nebraska, LSU, Illinois, places like that. But I think that he's a massive target. And if Purdue can land him, they're getting a lot of big time recruits in the door right now, which is a good sign, but you have to land some of those guys. And, it's, sometimes much easier to get there and try to sell your program than it is to sell the guy to the point that he's going to sign his name on a national letter of intent and ultimately probably some sort of contract on top of that. So it's obviously it's a pressing position because we know that Purdue didn't go out and get a quarterback this year, and Barry Odom has kind of doubled down on Ryan Brown being the starter. But Purdue will lose Bennett Meredith, I think, after this season. It's the only quarterback I think that will be out of eligibility after this season. So when you have that, you replace it with another quarterback. And I imagine that if you're doing things right, you're signing a quarterback in every single class, which Purdue did in its 2026 class with Corin Berry. But you got to find the 2027 quarterback. And if you can make it a big time 4-star guy, with a lot of offers, that's intriguing to the fan base on top of just building your football program.
Exactly. And I wrote something else last year, maybe it was even back in Ryan Walters' first year, that basically there's been no time in Purdue history, the modern history of Purdue. And I took this back to like the 50s or 60s, where they've had one of those seasons where they win, like, I can't remember what the minimum was, like 8 or 9 games without a quarterback who was either all Big Ten at some point in their career or started games in at least one game in the NFL. Like that you don't just get a guy at Purdue and win a lot of games with him. Like it never, ever, ever happens. And that's definitely a place that they are trying to get back to. Whether that is, Ryan Brown taking a jump and being that kind of guy, or if it's going to be in the aftermath of Ryan Brown. Obviously, the guys that they're recruiting for 2027, Brown can still be here for that year. So they could be bringing somebody in to compete for the backup job and then take it over after that. And they're also looking at important guys for 2028 as well. I just think that, and maybe quarterback is limiting it a little too much. I think once you start seeing, to me, a big breakthrough for Purdue is when you can get 4-star top like 100 to 200 players who aren't from West Lafayette or aren't following Jeff Brom from Louisville in the way that Rondell Moore did, right? Like it's one thing if you need to protect those guys. You need to, and if it's a guy from Indianapolis who a lot of people are competing for and you get him, I think that still counts. I'm just saying that when you have to go compete for a guy like that in a different way, that there's not a local pull for him in the same way, and you're starting to get those guys to sign and stay, that's going to be a sign that things are going back in the right direction, whether the wins are coming with it. I think, you have to win probably to some extent to get those guys. You have to start winning more than they have, but getting those guys can be the next leap, right? I don't think then you're not relying so much on trying to get something out of those guys who used to be considered the highly ranked prospects and went somewhere else and it didn't work out or whatever. I think getting them and developing them is going to be it's just one of those things that in the back of your mind, keep an eye on that, because when you start to see that, that'll be as much of an indicator of what people are really thinking about this program, regardless of what you're seeing recruits, prospects say when we call and talk to them.
Yeah, and just kind of to point on that, David Bell from Warren Central, big time recruit. Purdue gets him. That was some of the most successful offense Purdue's had, is when it had, they had Rondell Moore at the same time, but they didn't play a lot of games together because Rondell was hurt a lot. But just a guy that was that's a 3rd round NFL draft pick at receiver. And he changed games by himself sometimes because of what he was able to do.
And Purdue is still going to have to, it's never going to be that they're going to load up on those guys, right? They're still going to have to be the guys that are right about somebody that everybody else is wrong about. Like, guys that aren't necessarily 4- and 5-star prospects, but who turn into 4- and 5-star players. I always used to get in arguments with people when I was covering Ohio State, when I would be like, I don't really care anymore what a guy was in his prospect ranking once he's been at the school for 2 or 3 years. Now your star ranking is, what are you doing on the field? Like, those stars don't matter anymore. And we went back and forth about that because the places that get you have to get a lot of those 4 and 5 stars to compete at that level. But at the same time, it's, are you getting those guys and leveling them up? That's always been a secret, not a secret, but like that's always been an element of success at Purdue and is going to have to continue to be.
Yeah, so, Ryan Kerrigan is probably the one that sticks out.
He was that was exactly who I was thinking. Yeah, that's exactly who I was thinking about. Like somebody like that who doesn't have a plethora of offers. I mean, they have to get their Braden Smiths, right? They have to, like, that's it. Whether it's football or basketball, there's always kind of an element of that at Purdue that they're going to have to, at least when you're building something, you have to get more of those guys. The basketball guys will tell you they're in on a level of guys these days that they weren't a decade ago when they were sort of had their little dip and were just getting back to winning consistently, being an NCAA tournament team consistently. And the Braden Smith thing was specific to the circumstances of COVID and all that stuff. But it really, at every sport, they're going to have to get those kinds of guys. I'm not saying that they won't, and the program will be built more on those guys than upper tier guys. I'm just kind of keeping an eye on what it means for Purdue whether it is someone of this quarterback's capacity, whether it's someone else at a different position that is that highly recruited, and they can start getting those guys. It tells you, it just reinforces, I think, the real belief out there in what the program is trying to sell. They're not there yet, but we might see some indication of that in this 2027 class.
Yeah, and to kind of touch my point, I think what Purdue is doing from a roster standpoint right now is right in line with what Barry Odom said the ideologies were for the way he wanted to build this. You don't. Well, Purdue will probably lose players through the portal. Everybody does, but theoretically, you could bring back almost an entire roster next year. I think there's 4 receivers and 4 offensive linemen departing out of eligibility, and that's the most out of any position group. So a lot of guys who are juniors, sophomores, big signing class. So, get those guys, grow them, keep them around. That's kind of the staple of what Barry Odom is trying to do at Purdue.
And just a quick public service announcement. We're recording this Wednesday. We are scheduled to talk Thursday with Purdue GM Brandon Lee. And we can get into things maybe a little more granularly about the scouting that they did and the process by which they put together this class. Barry Odom has sort of a 10,000-foot view of it in some ways. Didn't get into really a lot of specifics with some of the guys. But especially as it gets to the transfer portal, I think we can probably get some more really like elemental details from Brandon Lee, hopefully, about how that group came together. So keep an ear out for that, or an eye out for that, whatever you prefer to use to consume our content, because that'll be up sometime Thursday afternoon. I want to get to some questions from you all who sent in some. Really appreciate it. You don't have to wait for us to ask for a call out. You can send us questions anytime. We really like to use them on these like midweek pods because we know that we're answering the questions and talk about the things that you want to talk about. Our friend Brad Eban, who sends us a lot of questions and is a frequent inquisitor of us, so we really appreciate his help. One of the questions he asked this week: do you think we'll see Jack Benter at the 3 again? Definitely seemed like Painter took the Maryland blowout as a great opportunity to experiment with that, but I wasn't sure what he thought of the results. Maybe just matchup based. Sam, what did you take out of what happened at Maryland with Benter?
Yeah, the Maryland game is kind of an outlier because it was out of hand by halftime, which allows you the freedom to do some different things. I asked it is the stupidest question of Matt Painter this season when Jack Benter went in at the 5 at the end of one of those early season blowouts, and I was like, was that just the situation where you're up 40 points, or could you theoretically like spread the floor, have him at the 5? And he's like, no. that ended the media availability that day, and he just walks off. So, but no, Jack Benter is more naturally a 3. He's playing a 4 this year because of the roster construction and what you need in terms of spelling Trey Kaufman-Renn at the 4. Now you have the flexibility of Trey at the 5, which Purdue's done a little bit more. Had a lot of success at Indiana with that late. Probably should have gone to it sooner based on kind of the results Purdue got out of it. But I think Jack Benter naturally will be a 3 at some point. But also for the sake of this season, I think it's just another, thing where you can take advantage of other teams because you have such depth and variety in what those guys can do. We've seen Braden Smith play off the ball and let Omer run the point. We've seen, Fletcher Loyer can play the 2 or the 3. CJ Cox, Jakari Harris are interchangeable and can play multiple positions. We just talked about Trey Kaufman-Renn. So that roster flexibility, I think, is probably Purdue's biggest strength. And I definitely think we'll see Jack Benter playing the 3 again at some point this year, possibly depending on the matchup in crucial minutes.
Yeah, I think as you look ahead to next season is where that's clearly his future. I mean, he's a big guard. He's not a small forward to me. He's a big guard. And when you look ahead to next season, so take Braden Smith out of the mix, take Fletcher Loyer out of the mix. So will Matt Painter ever go to a situation where CJ Cox and Jakari Harris are both starting and both on the court at the same time? Or will that always be sort of a shared identity between those two guys? I don't know. I think that remains to be seen. You'll obviously have Omer Meyer taking over the lead guard spot. Where does Antoine West fit into that? Is he playing a lot of 2? Is he sort of helping back up at the 1? There'll obviously be some other guys in the mix at that point too with the incoming class. That 3 spot is it's not just that it's open. I think it also, there's just a versatility that Benter will have at that point, because the time that he has spent at the 4 is going to benefit him in the long run, even when he's playing the 3. But also it benefits Purdue because if he has to shift back to there, you're not going to be asking him to do something that's out of his depth, or really even out of his comfort zone at that point. Like he has not just played the 4 this year; he's done it well. Like he has excelled there at times. He has helped them win games by being on the floor at that position. So I do think like anything you saw in the Maryland game was largely, especially in the second half, an example of a game that was out of hand and did let them let their hair down, let Painter, experiment a little bit more position wise, and just get guys more minutes too. They went long with Jakari Harris in the second half of that game. And I think it's because if Cox is starting and Cox is the one who tends to be on the floor at the end of a game, get Harris more minutes, that sort of thing. Like I that's what I took out of that more than anything. But I also think that it is his future that is a better fit for him in the long run. I think it's what he considers his identity more in the long run. But it might be a shared identity because, again, there's going to be matchups in the future where putting Benter at the 4 and getting 3 other guards on the floor makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and you space the floor obviously a lot that way. And if you do that and you put Trey Coppin-Wren at the 5 and give him the space to work that he had a lot of times last year, that's when he's most effective offensively. Obviously, we've seen his points per game dip tremendously from the 20 whatever he had last season, but he's playing the 4 and he's back to a situation where there's usually 2 bigs on the floor and there's less space to operate sometimes. So Jack Benter will play the 3 again at some point this year, and probably when Purdue needs to do that to take advantage of an opponent.
Second question here is Fletch out of his shooting slump. That's obviously Fletcher Loyer made 7 of 10 3-pointers at Maryland after scuffling for around 20%, I think 25%, somewhere in there over the previous several games. Just in the same way that one bad game is not a slump, then one good game is not a streak. And at the same time, though, I would say 2 things. Number one, as much as he dismissed it, I can't imagine it was not a positive thing for him to see the shots fall or to, if anything, get an interruption to a run like that then now pushes off any further discussion of his shooting maybe for another couple of weeks if things don't immediately go in a positive direction. But I would also say, I mean, he's at 39.5% this year, which again, around college basketball, there's a lot of guys who dream of shooting 39.5% on his volume of 3s and will never get there. But that's still 50 percentage points off almost of where he was each of the last 2 years as a high volume 3-point shooter. So if there's positive regression, he could be in for a big second half. Second half of the Big Ten season, I should say, 9 games left, because I went and extrapolated. So based on his attempts per game and how many attempts he would get to at the end of the year and I did it over 34 games, which would be 1 Big Ten tournament game and 2 NCAA tournament games, which I'm not predicting that's all they play. I'm just saying that would be kind of more of like a minimum of what I think they would play. That would mean to get up to that 44 point whatever percent by the end of that stretch, by the end of those 34 games, that would mean over these next 12 games, he would shoot something like 52% from 3. So if this was the start of positive regression, and that doesn't include the 7 of 10. So if this is the start of something, as I've been kind of saying all along, and I think other people have pointed out, like the positive regression ahead of him could be substantial. It could be a thing where he goes on a pretty extended run, not because he's doing anything different or just because the numbers dictate. It wasn't a fluke that he was a 44, 45% 3-point shooter for the last 2 seasons. That's really where he's supposed to be. And if the number's correct, it could surge back there in a dramatic way.
Yeah, and it's funny because I go back to this a lot, but people think this, have this great positive memory of Carson Edwards and how great of a shooter he was. And a lot of that is based on 4 NCAA tournament games. People forget right before that, he was struggling. And to the point where it's like, do you really want Carson Edwards just coming down and jacking up shots? And that turned out to be the best chance Purdue had to win a national championship that year. But He's a career 36.8% shooter. So Loyer is, 3+ percentage points, I think, over his career better than Carson Edwards was. Doesn't shoot the same amount. Carson Edwards was he was bringing the ball up the court. He was stepping up from 25, 30 feet sometimes and jacking up shots. And sometimes that was a good shot. Sometimes it shot Purdue out of games. But every shooter goes through these slumps. Dakota Mathias did it. Ryan Klein did it. It happens to everybody. I think that, this has happened to Fletcher Loyer over the last 3 years at some point as well. But seeing the 7 of 10, and Matt Painter said after the game, we hope this is the start of him becoming the best shooter in college basketball, which is what he's been labeled as by multiple players and now Matt Painter over the course of this season. I don't know if that's true because I haven't seen every shooter and haven't looked at the percentages of every shooter, but he's definitely one of the best, especially when he's hitting the way he did the other day. And I can only imagine that with this stretch of rest that they've now had, you get some fresher legs, then you see some go down, you get your confidence back maybe a little bit. And like I said on Sunday, I think what happened the other day kind of also started on the defensive end and just that energy. And then when you have that, it just kind of feeds into the offensive end, and then that feeds back into the defensive end. So if Purdue can put together the solid 40-minute ball game and play, in that kind of a flow, I think, he could have some big games here down the stretch. You need to see him do it because he's done it at times against Tennessee, Arizona, Duke, people like that throughout his career. You need to see those kinds of games when you play Michigan, Michigan State, some of these games that may decide your fate in the Big Ten standings or the case for a championship. Nebraska included in there as well. So I don't know that he's out of a slump. I guess the Oregon game will tell us a little bit more, but you see it for an extended period of time before you can really say with certainty.
I'm always hesitant to use slump too. Like there were several games in that stretch where Fletcher was only attempting like 3 threes in the game. Like that's a low volume for him, really. I mean, and so that was part of what was happening. Like you go 1 for 3, which is not, and for even a good shooter, like to only go 1 for 3 on a small sample size, you don't really say that as anything. It was just sort of the accumulation of those over enough days that threw things off, and people had forgotten that he had shot. There was like a 4 of 8 game that came right before that was in the middle of a lot of that. But I'm glad you brought up Carson Edwards. You know what he shot in Big Ten only games, 20 Big Ten games in the 2018-19 season. Do you know what he shot from 3?
I have no idea.
30.2%. He was a bad 3-point shooter for that kind of volume. That was on 199 attempts. He shot 30.2% from 3. That is detrimental to your team, frankly. Now, in his case, that's not 100% true because there was the gravity with which defenses paid attention to him affected other things, opened up other things. That team was still successful despite that, but it was a little bit of a drag on the offense. But the point was, he wasn't a 30% three-point shooter over 200 attempts. I mean, he was, but when you start pushing beyond that in number of attempts, at some point that was going to swing back in the other way, and it obviously did. It almost got Purdue to a Final Four. I mean, it was seconds away, fractions of a second away. I'm not trying to bring up poor memories here, but it was almost enough to get them to a Final Four. And if Fletcher Loyer were to similarly not get back to that 44% mark by the end of this season, not have some kind of explosion, I'm still always going to be assuming that the monster game is still just waiting there to be had.
Yeah, and let's put this out there. We're not comparing the offensive games of Carson Edwards and Fletcher Loyer by any means. Carson was explosive.
No, we're just talking about
like that and did a lot of other really good things. But you're absolutely right. And because Fletcher is such a good 3-point shooter, kind of to your point a little bit, it helps Purdue because defenses have to run out there and try to run him off the 3-point line. And that opens something up for somebody else. He's a more than capable passer. And you get a lot of positives sometimes, even when he's not making at a high clip, just because of the threat that he can.
One of the other things too, though, just to touch this base on this on Fletcher Loyer, because I think you brought up some other names. I think there's been kind of a, well, why isn't Fletcher Loyer Dakota Mathias, basically? Like, why can't he be an elite 3-point shooter and you put him on the other team's best offensive player? And if anything, I don't take that as like the way I have looked at it. And I understand why people say because of that, because he doesn't do that, then it puts more emphasis, urgency, whatever, on whether he's making his threes. If anything, it has given me further appreciation in retrospect for how great Dakota Mathias was. That he could be like borderline or, all Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year caliber guy and shoot. His last year, he shot 46.6% on 206 attempts from three. That I think it's more to me an appreciation of how unique that was than a criticism of whoever else not doing that.
Yeah, Dakota Mathias is my guy that I point to when I try to explain to people how hard it is to get to the NBA, because everybody just sees good college players and thinks they can make it. And I thought Dakota Mathias was a surefire guy that was going to stick in the league for a long time. Still playing pro basketball, but his NBA career was pretty short. But he had the size. He could shoot. He could defend. He could do a lot of different things. And that boded well at the college level. He was, benefited probably some by playing with Carson Edwards. But just, they're different players. And Fletcher Loyer, his best asset is probably, first of all, his basketball IQ, but then shooting 3-pointers. We've seen him go to the basket. He's really good at drawing some fouls and throwing up some junk and getting to the line, which you want because he's a high clip free throw shooter as well. But I guess the whole point back to this question is, I think there will become a point where Fletcher Loyer has a big game against a big team when Purdue has to have it. And I don't know if you'll see that for an extended string of games to say that it's not a slump or a hot streak or whatever you want to call it. But the potential is there to do what he did against Maryland, against anybody on the schedule.
I think that's maybe the best way to say it. It's like, I'm not telling people not to be wondering what's going on or lamenting the fact that one of your best 3-point shooters is so far below that historical norm that he had shot at. I would just also remind you that he could make 7 of 10 in an Elite 8 game and he'll be one of your favorite players of all time. Like that is definitely on the table, as it was with Edwards and Klein and other guys before them. We're going to go off the Purdue specific focus here for a second with another great question from Brad Eban, which was, what's your Mount Rushmore of sports movies? You can't double up on any sport. So if you pick Field of Dreams, you can't also pick the Natural or Major League, but you can choose any 4 sports and be as liberal as you want with what classifies as a sport. So chess, horse racing, auto racing, etc. And I thought let's just go back and forth. Do you have your 4 whittled down?
I have a bunch.
Well, let's get it down to 4. Let's go by the letter of the law, the spirit of the question.
Okay. Like Kevin Costner was in multiple baseball movies, and 2 of them, can throw out for the love of the game. Obviously, Field of Dreams was great. Bull Durham was great. I think, by the way this is constructed, am I picking 4 now, or am I picking 1 and then you're going to pick one of yours?
You give me one of yours, and we'll just go back and forth.
All right. Well, naturally, I grew up in Indiana, and this is kind of ingrained in your brain from when you grow up in the early 80s and you're 4 or 5 years old and this movie comes out and then you see it for the rest of history. Hoosiers has to be on my Mount Rushmore.
Hoosiers is also on my Mount Rushmore. It would be easy to say, like, the snobby answer here, I guess I wouldn't bemoan anyone who gave it, would be like, now I'm forgetting the name of the movie. The documentary about the basketball, Hoop Dreams. You would say, like Hoop Dreams is really, that's the best basketball movie anybody's ever made. And it's a really compelling, interesting movie, but I don't watch Hoop Dreams every year, but I probably watch Hoosiers at some point every year. And I'm not from Indiana. I'm from Danville, Illinois, which actually coincidentally is the birthplace and boyhood home of Gene Hackman. So I did have some further connection to the movie beyond that. But it's just in so many ways everything you want from a sports movie. And then my appreciation for it grew as I started covering sports in Indiana, because we used to do a like athlete of the week thing at the Journal and Courier, and it seemed like every basketball player I ever called, if it was a girl, they might say Love and Basketball, but every guy that I think I ever talked to for that, and a lot of the girls, their favorite movie was Hoosiers. We would always give this list of like, what's your favorite this and that, and they almost all of them said Hoosiers. I think there were high school teams that got together and watched Hoosiers
every year
or sectional, whatever. Like, yeah. So it's just a great piece of Indiana history, but it's also, I think, just a super awesome sports movie. I'm going to pick, now you and I, I'm sure we have to have at least one baseball film on this list. There are a lot of baseball snobs who have qualms with Field of Dreams. I'm not one of them. I love Field of Dreams. But if I were being honest about which baseball film I'm most excited to watch over and over again, I would pick Bull Durham. That I think is one that it's more quotable. It is one that if you're just going to like watch clips of it on YouTube or whatever, I'm probably going to that. I think there's a wider variety of really fun performances in that movie. I think it works on a lot of levels. So I would pick Bull Durham as my one baseball choice. But I want to make sure that, because there's people who think, oh, Field of Dreams is like so schmaltzy and melodramatic, and it is those things, but I love baseball too much. I can't help it. I love Field of Dreams too.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, like those two are like, back and forth for me. If you have a pitcher named Luke Lelouch, I think that tops the name category in terms of sports figures and movies. I have an extended DVD collection that's buried somewhere now because they're obsolete, but every baseball movie you could think of, Pride of the Yankees, 61, whatever it might be, The Rookie. I love baseball movies and the theatrics of it. Since you said Field of Dreams, or said Bull Durham and mentioned Field of Dreams, I'm going to go off the beaten path a little bit with Major League. When you talk about quotable movies, and
yes.
Listen, it's outlandish and it's never could be a true story, but that's kind of the fun in it, is just this insanely wild hodgepodge of guys put together to go out and compete for a playoff spot.
In its own way, it's even more outlandish than plowing under your corn and building a baseball diamond and Shoeless Joe Jackson comes back to life. Like, it's almost as implausible as that.
Yeah. It's a movie that even today, I think you can watch, and despite the 30 plus years, probably it's been 40 years since not 40, 30 some years since that movie came out, probably. It still holds up just in terms of the comedy and some of that stuff. And I'm sure there's some things that over time have been, extradited from things that you'd want kids seeing or whatever. But I think Major League is a good pick. And I'm not so much picking it because it's my favorite. I'm picking it because you said Bull Durham.
Fair enough, but I love Major League too. I love Major League also. I don't know if I love Major League 2, the sequel. It's fine.
Or 3.
Major League also. Yeah, Major League 3 is rough. When they're actually not in the majors anymore, right? They're down. It's about,
they all go to the minor league somehow after going to the playoffs. So
right. It's a little bit, it's not what you want, but the first one is, I think, holds up as it's a good sports movie on its own. It's also a very 80s relic. I could see someone, if you're listening to us and you're in your 20s, you were born in 2000 or whatever, and there's going to be a lot in that movie that feels very dated and probably would push you away from enjoying the movie. But I think for you and I, like late 80s, early 90s, there's a lot of nostalgia for just not just what baseball was like, but like what everything was like. And that is part of the why, if you're just talking about favorites for me personally, that's why that one is high on my list. What else is on your list?
Well, that would strike out A League of Their Own, which I think is a really good one. And I think it's important for the historical context of baseball, the people that don't know about, the history of women's baseball, and that was actually a thing at one point. I said Hoosiers, so that strikes out Blue Chips, which is just an awful movie, but a personal favorite of mine because when I was a
I don't
kid,
know if it's an awful movie, but it is. It's over the top.
yeah. Uh, the movie parts of that movie were filmed in Frankfort, Indiana, where I grew up. And when I was 10, 11 years old, I went to those games that they filmed for that movie. So it's kind of always had like a place in my heart. I'm going to go off the beaten path here, and I'm sure it's one that you don't have, knowing that this isn't something that you're highly interested in, but and loosely using this as sport. But I chose The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke and Marissa Tomei because I think it's emblematic of what some of these famous TV wrestlers of the 80s and 90s who then have to find a way to make money when that's no longer an option because you age out or injuries pile up or whatever. Kind of the struggles that some of those people go through after the fact. And thought tremendous acting and great storytelling. And it's, for a traditional sports fan, probably not something that you would say, hey, that's a sports movie, but that's one of the ones I chose. And I didn't know with that and with Foxcatcher, I don't know how familiar you are with Foxcatcher and John DuPont. I kind of classed those both in the wrestling category. So that would strike out Foxcatcher as well.
Or would it? Because one of those is about actual wrestling, and
right.
one of them
one's about amateur, or actually, I guess,
pageant
wrestling. So
it's about soap opera wrestling. No, don't send me your emails. No, I think both of those. The Wrestler is Darren Aronofsky, who's one of my favorite directors. I actually don't know if I've seen that film, partially because I'm not a pro wrestling guy, and maybe for whatever reason it slipped through. I love Foxcatcher though, which is a weird thing to say because Foxcatcher is not a fun movie in any way. It is very dark, but there is some tremendous performances in that. Steve Carell, Mark Ruffalo, there's a lot of Channing Tatum. Like there's a lot of really good performances in that movie. So I do recommend that. Just you're not going to have what I would call a good time. It's a rough hang because it's based on some true events and serious events, but still a compelling movie, especially if you like amateur wrestling, like Olympic, high school, college wrestling. If we're staying on the fringes of what counts as a sport, because this question did open it up to things like chess. And I didn't pick a chess movie, although if you've never seen Searching for Bobby Fischer, that's actually a really fun movie. But I picked Rounders, which because poker was on ESPN so incessantly for so long, I think it qualifies under this. And I think there's a lot of people like me. This might actually, if you're going to broaden it out to this extent, this might be my favorite sports movie because of just how much I enjoy the movie. And I think there's a lot of people who got sucked into being adequate to bad poker players for a long time who owe a debt of gratitude or blame for this movie. But it's one, if this is of all the movies we talked about, this is the one that I probably enjoy rewatching the most. And it's also one that I feel like I can just throw on in the background while I'm doing something else. And even though it deals with some dark stuff too, it's funny enough and it has enough just like of a vibe that it's fun to just kind of have going off to the side.
Yeah, I've actually never seen Rounders, and like you, we're similar in age. And I remember when the poker explosion kind of happened, and a World Series of Poker was on ESPN, and then poker tournaments were just on, all the sports channels, and it kind of sucked me in to the point where I, that's how I learned how to play poker, was watching that. And then I went to Vegas and entered in a poker tournament, and that was a bad idea. You don't just do that as an amateur who's very novice. There's some, big time people who can read tells and things like that. And I'm just sitting there kind of out of my element a little bit. But that's a good choice. I was thinking 21, the movie about the kids from MIT, I think it is, that go to Vegas and win a bunch of money in blackjack. So I kind of struck that from the category, but I guess it does fall in the same kind of realm as, The Wrestler, or I guess Rounders in this case. So.
Yeah, 21's fun as well. What's your number? What's the fourth member of your, or did we do 3 for you already? Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your fourth one?
I had a lot of baseball off the top of my head. Jerry Maguire, I guess, would count as a football movie, although it's more kind of an agent movie. I I'm going to go with Remember the Titans, though, just because, again, while it's historically inaccurate in a lot of ways, as all Hollywood movies are, it still is based loosely on a true story that is an important part of history. Segregation and integrating Black students and white students at a time where that was uncommon in an area where, that wasn't, the norm, and seeing it all come together and propel a football team to greatness when those kids join together and realize that they're kind of in a lot of ways similar and just teenage kids. So I love Remember the Titans. When I was in college, I had it on VHS, and we would watch. My roommate and I, our freshman year, would watch that and Varsity Blues over and over. Two totally different football movies, by the way. But I think both of us could recite the entire movies at one point. And Remember the Titans obviously has stood the test of time a little bit, just because of the acting in it, but also because of the story.
No, you have some legit actors in, Denzel Washington and then beyond, and Remember the Titans. So I think that's a big reason why that has held up. Varsity Blues came out, I believe, when I was in high school. That and The Program came out like relatively close to each other, both preposterous in their own ways, and they're fine. Again, those are more just like those are like the candy store level of movies to me. Like, it's fine. But I think I'm glad you picked something like Remember the Titans that had more substance. I struggled to come up with a football one that I would put on here, and I actually went in a different direction altogether. And we'll have to go to the judges to make sure this even qualifies. But when he left it open for things like chess and horse racing and auto racing, my mind went to bowling. And The Big Lebowski is not about bowling, but it is so associated with bowling that I'm going to include it here and hope for grace from the judges. It's, I think, probably pound for pound the best movie we've talked about so far. Bowling is a recurring backdrop throughout the movie. It is not a movie about bowling. It's a movie about any number of other things. You can get really deep into what the movie is actually about. But it's if you haven't seen it and you like dark comedies, it's obviously a classic, Coen Brothers. But it's probably my favorite movie of any of the movies we've talked about here, and it has enough bowling in it that I'm gonna put it on my list.
The dude abides. So
the dude does abide. So thanks for that question. We love those kind of questions. Like, let's go a little bit beyond just talking about what's happening right in front of us with Purdue basketball or the Big Ten, which is what this next question delves into. I hear a lot about the West Coast teams being at a travel disadvantage in the Big Ten, but Maryland and Rutgers have it pretty rough too. It also seems like Maryland lost their rivalries when they left the ACC. Do you see them ever being an elite basketball program again? It's kind of a two-part question. Do you see them ever being an elite basketball program again? And do you think part of them regrets their decision to leave the ACC? Let's take the first question first. Sam, do you think Maryland was bad? Like, Maryland was not good on Saturday. I saw it in person. You watched it on TV. I was a little bit shook at how bad they were, frankly. That you shouldn't go on the road and win at Maryland and come home with a quad 3 win. Like, that's something's wrong with the state of, well, maybe not college basketball as a whole, but certainly the state of Maryland basketball when that's the case. Do you see them returning to an elite level?
Elite as in like 2002 national champions, or a team that's consistently making the NCAA tournaments?
I would call Purdue elite, and Purdue has not won a national championship. So right. Gonzaga is elite. Gonzaga's never won a national championship.
I think Maryland can be a team that factors into being top half of the Big Ten, competing for Sweet 16, Elite Eights. Like, the Final Four is extremely hard, and the teams that do it consistently are rare. Michigan State, the North Carolina's, Dukes, places like that. I think Maryland can get there. Obviously, we're not far off from when Maryland stormed the court after beating Purdue just a few years ago, when everybody was storming the court when they beat Purdue, and now unless you're UCLA, it's not a reason to storm the court, I guess, anymore, because Purdue's not the number 1 ranked team in the country. But listen, Buzz Williams has had success at a lot of different places. I think that, he seems to be a guy that maybe wears out his welcome everywhere he goes. But Maryland also thought it had its coach, and he left for basically a similar job, and that opened the door for Buzz Williams. He brought some of the guys who were successful last year with him at Texas A&M, and I think this team has kind of been doomed in a big way by its star player being hurt. So we got to take that into account too. But I think that there is potential for Maryland to get back to being competitive. What are they, 1-9 in the Big Ten right now, something like that. That's, if you look at the grand scheme of things over time, that's not who Maryland is. So I wouldn't just look at this year and be like, well, Maryland's bad now, because we've seen teams be able to turn it around from one year to the next.
Yeah, I think they can be elite again, however you want to quantify that, however you want to define that. There's just too much talent right there in their backyard in the DMV. I think Buzz Williams is a good coach. I mean, I think that's been demonstrated. I do think you might be right about wearing out his welcome, and we'll see how long. I mean, it doesn't seem like anybody's really having that much fun at Maryland today. I was in the end of Maryland's players press conference last Sunday after that game, and they were both talking about, I don't know, maybe they felt like things are going on there, and I haven't followed it that closely. Maybe they felt compelled to come out on behalf of their coaches and say something, but they were talking about, this coaching staff is trying everything. They're trying a lot of things. Like, they're trying to find the thing that works and gets us back to winning. And they were kind of giving the coaching staff credit for how much they're trying and how hard they're working to do things. This is obviously a rough stretch. Injuries have hurt them, but it's Maryland. Like, I think there is too much of a foundation of winning there, and I don't think moving into the Big Ten hurts them in basketball the way it does competitively in terms of them or Rutgers in terms of football winning. But that leads us to the second question, which was, do you think part of them regrets their decision to leave the ACC? Well, they may regret it in terms of their basketball rivalries, but as an institution, absolutely not. They don't regret it. They make way, way, way more money in the Big Ten, and it's money that helps them be good at basketball in theory, even if they're taking it on the chin in football. Purdue's athletic revenue, I just wrote a report about, an article about the report that they had to send to the NCAA that every January, and it's always 1 year behind. So this was for 2024-25. But 48.7% of Purdue's athletic revenue is essentially things that it gets just for existing in the Big Ten. It was either the media rights deal, which was like 62 million, something like that, and then another 10 point something million that was income revenue from other Big Ten teams having postseason football success, right, that gets shared with all of the league, and also just the Big Ten being guaranteed certain payments from the CFP. So it's not money necessarily that other Big Ten teams won for them to some extent, but they were always going to get that. But it's not money that they got for achieving something. So like 48% of their athletic revenue for that 2024-25 year for Purdue is just what you get for being in the Big Ten. And there's reports out there right now of the debt that Rutgers is dealing with, the budget deficit that it's dealing with on a year-to-year basis. I think that even includes after they take fees or whatever from students to go towards athletics. Purdue, up until through that 2024-25, still taking no assistance. It's the financial realities are that if Maryland or Rutgers weren't in the Big Ten, they would be in a really bad spot, especially Rutgers. So I think it's a matter of just whether it's Buzz Williams or whether it's someone else. I think the overriding lesson of Curt Cignetti at IU is if you get the right coach, anything is possible. And that's more true in basketball to me than it is in football. It's what makes what happened at IU even more miraculous from a football standpoint. But in basketball, you get the right coach there, and within a couple of years, especially now that they can bring players with them, who knows what's possible. So Maryland someday will be problem in the Big Ten. It won't be a quad 3 win when you win there. It's just at a really low blip right now from a wins and losses standpoint in basketball.
Yeah. Listen, the money involved is why the Big Ten is what it is. It's why USC and UCLA and Oregon and Washington are joining the Big Ten and willing to fly across the country numerous times to play midweek games because the money kind of outweighs the negatives and all that travel. Maybe not if you're an athlete, but for the university and the athletics programs, it certainly does. When Maryland and Rutgers joined, it was for the Big Ten to expand to the East Coast, and they needed an East Coast, team, I guess, to pin and sell the Big Ten network out there, and those were the teams that they could lure at the time, and I think Maryland's benefited the Big Ten in some ways. I remember when it happened, and some coaches at Purdue saying, Rutgers does nothing for us. They're bad at this sport. They whatever. It doesn't help us. But Maryland, and Matt Painter may have said this even if I recall. Maryland, that's a big get because now you add them on the schedule, and that helps your NCAA resume. And seeing a team like that, and then if you can get a win against a team like that, not the case this year, as you pointed out, but I do think that Maryland will be fine in the long run. And as far as leaving the ACC, listen, did they join in 2014? I think I can't remember now off the top of my head.
Yeah, right. It was right when I started covering the team. So yeah, it might have been 2013-14 might have been the first year.
Yeah. So back then they even weighed the pros and cons of joining the Big Ten, I'm sure, and saw far more, financial gain in joining the Big Ten and eliminating your ACC rivalries. The ACC was awesome in basketball. The Big East used to be a huge basketball conference, and the way things are now are nothing like they were kind of back in what I would consider the heyday of college basketball when I was younger, and you had these elite rivalries. Now there's few and far between when you get the Purdues and IUs, the Ohio States and Michigans, the Dukes and North Carolinas. A lot of those rivalries have dissipated just because of conference realignment.
The other thing to remember is, like, we're having this discussion through a basketball lens. Purdue was just at Maryland. That's what prompted this question. All the financial conversations are football. Like, they're all football. Yes. And even the media rights thing, it's broken up. I don't think I have the report up right now, and it can be hard to find stuff on there. But the media rights, when you look at the report that Purdue submits, is split up between two sports, football and men's basketball. No other media rights income is, because they have to go sport by sport to put income and expenses. No other media rights income from any other sport, but the huge portion of that is football. It's what drives viewerships on Saturdays. And like, if you're complaining right now about schools like Maryland and Rutgers and what they really bring, they don't bring history, but they bring eyeballs, and they bring a greater reach for the Big Ten, which makes it more lucrative. They do that more than Purdue does, right? Like, Purdue brings history. Purdue brings an iconic Big Ten brand for a lot of people, but the Big Ten would still have the Indianapolis market if Purdue collapsed into the Wabash tomorrow, right? So keep that in mind, that there's a lot of economic factors that are involved here, and everybody's bringing something to the table, and it's lucrative for everybody at the end of the day. So speaking of lucrative, one quick question. Well, this was too good not to touch on. Has Braden Smith made more money while at Purdue than Gene Katie? Well, no. Especially when you correct it for inflation. I looked in the later years of Katie's career. I think he was making like $350,000 a year, which in today's money is almost double that, because you're talking about getting up close to, it's 25 or 30 years ago now. We don't know to the dollar. I know there's estimates out there about how much Braden Smith is making, and I don't have the confirmation on those numbers to where I would want to say them. But if you're talking about the entirety of his career, no, Braden Smith does not make more in NIL in 1 or 2 years than Gene Katie made over a couple of decades coaching. What I think is a more interesting question is, does he make more? Like Matt Painter makes like 4.85 million, I think, right now, roughly. Right, is his
Base
salary?
salary, yeah.
And like, how long before a basketball player makes more than him if that's not already happening? But you also have to remember there. The whole point of this is that there's the revenue share that Purdue gives to players, and then there's the deals that they can get on top of that, and that's stuff that nobody have to disclose to anybody because it's income that isn't coming from the school, and they have to disclose it to the clearinghouse, but doesn't have to ever get out public. So players like him and Zach Edey before him, although his situation was complicated by being a foreign student, they will have money that they can get beyond what Purdue gives them. So that's a more complicated question, but I think we probably are headed there someday where Matt Painter will no longer be the most highly paid person involved with Purdue basketball. I bet that happens one day.
Yeah. So you mentioned 350,000. Even if we go back before that, the early 90s, when he's making $150,000, $130,000, like when you count it up over 25 years, Gene Keady made more money, and that's not the important thing here, but it is the question. Braden Smith also has, as you mentioned, a lot of stuff on the side. He was here at a local supermarket the day after the IU game, I think, and he had fans lined up out the door just to meet him, and it was promoted by Ritz Crackers or something like that, and he had this goofy looking leather jacket on that was Ritz Crackers embroidered and whatnot. But he sat there, he signed autographs, he took pictures with people for however long the sit down was, and I'm sure that was not cheap to get him to do that. He's got a lot of deals on the side on top of what Purdue was paying him. But listen, Gene Keady is probably now in his later years, not anywhere close to what Braden Smith is in terms of what finances they have available to them. But I think that both are doing very fine. Braden Smith's going to be fine. I mean, he could stop playing basketball after this year, and if he manages money correctly, never have to work again. So we are on the trek, though, to the point where it's possible that there are football players at some universities making more than the head basketball coach. I don't think right now there are basketball players somewhere making more than the head basketball coach.
Yeah, that is probably true. At least in terms of, again, what gets tricky is you can figure some of this out by just from a rev share standpoint. Purdue is giving somewhere around 14 to 15 million, we think, of its money to football, its rev share funds, and it's giving a smaller sliver to like women's basketball and volleyball, and then the rest goes to football, right? So we're guessing somewhere in the neighborhood of like 5 to 6 million goes to basketball right now, men's basketball. So you split that up over however many spots. Yes, there are players who get more, but it's really when you start factoring in that over the top money, that's where it gets harder to make any kind of declarative statement on some of these things. But there definitely are football players. I mean, that I think is out there on the record as far as what some football quarterbacks, especially the top end of that market, are making. And there are definitely some of them at places that aren't really basketball powers that are probably making more than the basketball coach for sure.
Yeah. That's all I have to say on that. And especially because we don't know what the NIL money that Braden Smith is bringing in. He's got a great agent. He's putting him in contact with, a lot of companies. He's maximizing the fact that he's one of the faces of college basketball, as he should. The rules allow it, and he's playing by the letter of the law. Like, you should gain as much as you can from the short period of time you have to be at Purdue and be the face of one of the top programs in the country.
I think that he is an interesting case study in that, because again, in some ways he's not the face of college football or college basketball the way, even to the extent that Zach Edey was, right? I think Edey, partially just because of his immense size and what he did on any given night, was a more just recognizable figure in some ways. But Braden Smith is certainly like that next tier down, and to be at a place where it's more rural, it's not associated with big spending mega donors. You're not in a major city. Those sorts of things would work against you. And to be getting as much out of it as he is, I think, is an interesting case study for how Purdue needs to go about this in the future. But again, it's also an important case study for there's only so much Purdue can do, even with the help that it's allowed to give beyond rev share, with the help it's allowed to give in terms of advice and things like that, and the Boiler brand works and the things that it can be involved in. To some extent, this is about also, when you are the stature of Braden Smith, picking the right representation and getting everything you can out of that, like making sure that they capitalize on it, because you can't be the one that's out there doing it yourself, like trying to get those deals. Like, it really has to come through someone like that. And it seems like Braden Smith had access to a level of agent that then went and got that done. Like, not everybody is probably going to be represented by the Mark Bartelstein group or whatever, right? Like, it's not every even good player is going to have access to that. So, but I think that's it. It is an interesting case study just in how much did he maximize. And in the next Purdue athlete, I think what's going to be interesting is we are at a low place in Purdue football history. Did you guys know that? Am I overstating the obvious? We're not at a great place in terms of Purdue football history. But Purdue football history, while it has always had some of these low moments, always does eventually rise back to some point of prominence, whether that is of varying levels. I'm just thinking ahead to when they have Rondale Moore again, when they have a fringe Heisman Trophy candidate quarterback somewhere in their future. I'm not saying it's going to happen in the next 5 years, but I'm saying someday a Purdue player will be in that conversation again. And when it's football, when it's a marquee position, what apparatus is set up at Purdue to help that person, but then just what decisions does that person make to get the most out of that opportunity?
Yeah, if you placed Drew Brees in the current day of college football, and a guy who would have stayed at one place 4 years and become a 2-time Heisman Trophy finalist, the money would be there. Even if George Karlaftis was delayed by 5 or 6 years and was playing college football now, I'd be interested to see what kind of marketing opportunities there would be for some football guys. Right now, I think that Devin Mockabee was probably a guy that was recognizable on the football team, but I'm not sure how many of those guys go out in public and people just recognize who they are.
Not really beyond Purdue fans. That's what I'm talking about. Like, it has to be somebody who makes an impact beyond that, somebody who kind of breaks through, like Fernando Mendoza, right? Like what he did at IU. And then obviously he won the Heisman Trophy, so that goes to an even higher level. But even before that, I think that was somebody who had started to put themselves on a different level. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that we could talk about in terms of that sort of thing. I do think it's interesting, though. It's interesting you mentioned Drew Brees, because there may not be anyone associated in a significant way with Purdue athletics who hates what's happening to college sports right now more than Drew Brees. Like, right. I've had conversations with him about NIL and things like that. He's not a fan, transfer portal, all those things. Like, he's a very old school, has a very old school mindset with these sorts of things. And as Purdue reaches its next stage, I'm going to leave with this thought. We just met with Mike Bobinski a couple months ago, as people might remember, however many weeks ago that's been. He was asked, as he always is, like, hey, how much longer are you going to keep doing this? He's like, well, it's not time yet to start that conversation. I believe his contract expires maybe in 2028.
Summer of 29, I think, is the
28 or 29. And I would imagine at some point there will be, I'm not saying this year, but eventually there will probably be an announcement. I would be surprised if he remained in the job beyond that. And there will probably be a time where he says he's going to resign. He'll retire at the end of that contract, and it'll start the process for Purdue finding a successor. And I think they're going to have to find a successor who is not tied into the traditional Purdue way of thinking about some of these things. It's going to have to be somebody who comes in and has some foresight and some charisma to take someone like Drew Brees and maybe bring them more into the present day of what this is, and help that kind of build the machine a little bit more. I think they would do well to go out of their comfort zone and find someone who is just a little bit more. And this isn't a criticism of Mike Bobinski, because all this started. He wasn't chosen based on what college sports is today. No one was foreseeing that at that point. But I think as you look forward, both of what you know and how unpredictable it might be on a week-to-week basis, let alone year to year, I'm curious what the board at that time chooses to do, because if you're just picking someone who is very steeped and attached to Purdue history or the way Purdue has always done things, I don't think that's maybe the most logical path forward.
No, there has to be some forward thinking, not only based on what the current environment is, but what it might become in the next few years after you're hired. And I'm sure that would be a question during the interview process whenever that time comes, because this was beyond the realm of possibility probably when Mike Bobinski was hired, that it would become a place where athletes are making millions of dollars at the college level and signing contracts. And I think we could start to see maybe the early stages of there's going to have to be some way for these people to earn income on their name, image, and likeness, which was what ultimately I think 2021, whenever that happened, ultimately changes the game a little bit. But yeah, it'll be interesting when that time comes to see what Purdue's mode of thinking is in terms of finding a successor.
I've had that thought on my mind basically ever since I came back and started covering Purdue sports again. It was like, what do they do with the next stage of things? Do they, and Mike Bobinski was not someone who was attached to Purdue, but I think he was also someone with that they recognize Purdue values in, for whatever you want to make of that, right? He could be sort of the best of both worlds. Like had some connections in the Midwest, had been an athlete in Indiana, and yet had experiences outside the Big Ten, had his college basketball connections, like all those things I think were positive for Purdue. And I know there's a lot of fans who right now put a lot of blame on him for where football is. And I understand that, because at the end of the day, he was the one who chose Ryan Walters, and that was a setback. But I think we're talking more about, and we're talking 2 or 3 years down the line when this conversation comes up. I'm really curious where they look, because I think who they choose is going to reflect on who they believe they are at that point. And are you willing to go get someone who will push your fan base and your boosters outside of the comfort zone and find a new level of booster or something? Or you pick someone who will manage the Purdue identity the best? I don't know. I'm very curious about where that goes.
And it's not just, this doesn't all fall on the athletic director. I mean, you got a board, you've got a staff in the athletic department, the whole team of people. There's a big trickle down effect. It's just kind of like when teams lose, the head coach gets all the blame. The head coach is not the sole reason a team wins or loses a game. But Mike Bobinski, he said, what did he say? Like, I know that there's less daylight ahead than behind, or whatever he said, in terms of like how many more years he'll do this. And he kind of gives a bland response every year to that question. But I wouldn't be surprised if when he does make that announcement, if Purdue would even have some sort of succession plan in place. But I think it would be more likely that they would just hire somebody from the outside once that contract expires, and then bring them in and say, hey, it's clean slate. You run with it however you wish.
What tends to happen, I went through this at Ohio State. Gene Smith had been there for a long time. He said he's going to retire no later than the end of his contract. They then hired Ross Bjork from Texas A&M, and I can't remember what point of the year they brought him in, but it was before Smith left. So they brought him in under a different title, basically. It was kind of like the Matt Painter succession plan almost, right? Or the Danny Hope succession plan. Like they brought him in under a different title. He spent several months working with the outgoing AD and then took over the job again full time. So I could see Purdue maybe going along something along those lines. There may have been even some overlap. I can't remember now when Bobinski came in and Morgan Burke was going out, that Burke stayed around in some advisory capacity. And obviously he's since passed away, but he was always around. So he was always there as a, for those early days, could be there for helping. Anyway, we're straying really far away. I thought we were gonna be done talking 20 minutes ago, but we that's kind of an interesting topic. And I think there will be a time in the future when we'll have to come back.
Well, rev share all will become public information at some point too. So we'll have more clear picture on what these guys make, just in terms of the straight from the university.
Maybe. I'm very curious how that's going to play out, because now we're getting in the weeds journalism wise, but on those, that form that they have to send to the NCAA every year, that is a public record. That's why every beat writer for every public school in the country gets that document, or it's like a 40-some page document. And it goes sport by sport, what your expenditures were, what your revenue was. Are they going to have a line item in that going forward? And it would be starting with this next report that will come out next January that says what each sport at each school spent on revenue share. Or will that be excluded for some reason that will probably, then they'll get sued by some news organization and there'll be a whole fight about it. I think some of those fights are going to precede that, actually. Or will there be some sort of loophole that they'll find a reason why they don't have to exclude that, that sort of thing. I can tell you that there are certain things that certain contracts Purdue has that bring money into Purdue, but because they are executed by Learfield, those are not subject to public records disclosure. So there's times where we can find out specific things about how Purdue is getting and receiving money, and there's times that we can't because of just how the business operations are set up. So trust me, I've had these discussions with other people. I'm curious how much transparency there is going to be. But we're slowly getting more. Like when we first talked to Mike Bobinski last June, I want to say it was, and I was like, oh, so how much are you giving? Like, what percentage to each sport? And he's like, well, I don't want to get into. I think he even phrased it like, hey, the going assumption is like 70 to 75% for football. Is that what you guys are spending? And he didn't want to. He's like, well, we're in that range. And then by the time we talked to him a few weeks ago, he was giving us much more specific percentages on what they were spending. Now, things have gotten farther down the line. It's more public knowledge what teams, schools are spending. So maybe it doesn't feel like it's as much of a trade secret or whatever. But slowly the schools are being a little bit more transparent, at least with what they're willing to say. But just as when my wife is covering the governor's office, she doesn't take what they say they're spending in the state budget to be the truth. Like, you go get the budget and look at it. So I'm curious if we're going to ever get that level of transparency. We're pushing for it.
They could just put the bottom line, like 20.8 million or whatever it is for this year, and have that as an additional category all on its own without breaking it down. But
everything else is broken down by sport. So I think they probably would.
Okay. Well,
if it's even on there,
we'll find out. Yeah, we'll find out next January for sure. But yeah, just to kind of go off that for the people that may not have looked, Bobinski said that Purdue's in the top half in football in terms of rev share, I think, something along those lines. And in basketball is top 3 to 4 in the league. I think Purdue is giving more towards basketball right now than a lot of other places that are investing more in football. But quite honestly, Purdue should be right now, because it's at a chance where it's got to capitalize on an opportunity to maybe win a national title.
And again, this is the rev share. This is the money that
Right.
Purdue controls and gives to the athletes. That's different than the full NIL concept where you're getting outside deals. But as far as the rev share, I think that if you're a Purdue fan who thinks they need to give more of that to football, it means you're taking it away from basketball or you're taking it away from somewhere. And what they give to like women's basketball, volleyball, other sports is such a fractional amount of this that it's one or the other. And I don't think you really want them taking money away from football right now or taking money away from basketball to give it to football. I think if you're gonna protect your most valuable asset, and from a brand standpoint, right now that is basketball, and the one where you are on the precipice of achieving the most. I think you have to make sure that basketball is better funded than a lot of your peers, but they are not doing it at the expense of football being an afterthought. They are. Every indication we have is that they have the money they need to spend on football, as we discussed before. Now it's just a matter of getting the right players to take it. And there's players that they don't have access to right now to give them that money. Like they just, it's the conundrum of the rebuild, that even if you have the money, you may not have access to the people to spend it on.
Yeah, that's 2-10 and 1-11 in back-to-back years. That's what hinders you in that department.
Yeah. And I think if they had gotten to 4-8 this past year, I think there probably would have gotten a couple more better players. I think that would have been more tangible progress, or tangible proof of progress, tangible proof of concept of what Barry Odom is going to do here. And there would have been more momentum. And I think there probably would have been a couple of players that they got that they couldn't have otherwise got. That'll be an interesting question for Brandon Lee when we talk to him on Thursday. So again, look out for that. Our reporting from that, IndyStar.com, JCOnline.com. He's Sam King. I'm Nathan Baird. Thanks for joining us.